10 years ago, if you would have told me that we would have a Venom trilogy before a modern Superman trilogy, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are. What's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and welcome back to another video. So today I've got a tier list ranking of comic book movie trilogies. With the release of Venom: The Last Dance over the weekend, we now have another comic book movie trilogy. So instead of ranking these straight up, I said, you know what? I'm gonna rank tier list style all the comic book movie trilogies that I personally have seen. Let me know your ranking of all the comic book movie trilogies down below, and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to help me reach my goal of 150,000 subscribers here on the channel. It would mean a lot. Without further ado, I say we dive into this tier list. So the tiers we have today are S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, D tier, and F tier. These are your standard tiers. I eliminate E because who really needs it? But first up here, fully randomized, we've got the Ant-Man trilogy. The first Ant-Man film is one of the most underrated in the MCU, in my opinion. It's a heist film. It's fun. It's fresh at the time it was for the MCU, at least. Ant-Man and the Wasp is a highly forgettable sequel, and Quantumania is probably a tad overhated. It's not like the worst thing I've ever seen, but it hasn't aged well for me, to say the least. I'm going to say, as a whole trilogy, this is probably a D-tier trilogy. Again, I have a soft spot for that first Ant-Man. I think Paul Rudd crushes it as Scott Lang, but as a body of work, it doesn't really work as a trilogy that well. Moving on, though, we've got The Dark Knight, which is like polar opposite. This is an S-tier trilogy. Many would say it's not only the best comic book movie trilogy of all time, but the best trilogy ever made. And you know what? I'm not going to argue with you there. I think The Dark Knight's the top tier of this trilogy. The Dark Knight Rises is a hair below it, and Begins is the weakest, though it's still a very good movie. They're all at least a 4.5 out of 5 in this trilogy. The Dark Knight, again, features probably the best performance we've ever seen from Heath Ledger. You could argue that, right? And then this is just Nolan at his best. I mean, he ate with this trilogy, and I'm not going to argue with anyone who says this is the best trilogy ever. It's not my personal favorite. I don't think it's the best trilogy. I think there are a handful that are better, but this transcends the comic book genre. This is one of the all-time great trilogies, period. So, of course, I have to put it in S tier. Moving on, we've got Venom. This trilogy consists of Venom, Venom Let There Be Carnage, and Venom: The Last Dance. The Last Dance might be the worst of the bunch, and Let There Be Carnage stinks. The first one is fine at best. This, to me, as a whole trilogy, frankly, is an F-tier trilogy. The first movie is like a 2 to 2.5 out of 5. Then you somehow take a step back from that with Woody Harrelson as Carnage in Let There Be Carnage, and the third film is absolute nonsense. It opens with this deep, ominous voiceover from Noel, who's supposed to be the big bad villain, and he's never even in the movie. It's a joke, and the movie is so dumb. It's beyond stupid. Oh, it's so frustrating. I can't even get into spoilers, but it's so frustrating how stupid characters are in this movie. I was just at a loss for words with how ridiculous that third entry was. To be a third film in a trilogy and be this bad, wow. I think they're all bad. All bad. Not a single good movie. It's an F-tier trilogy. I don't know how we're sitting here in the year 2024 with a Venom trilogy before a Superman trilogy, before, say, a Wonder Woman trilogy, before a Doctor Strange trilogy even. I mean, it baffles me truly that we got 3 of these movies, and I think, you know, if it is the last one, good riddance. Moving on, we've got the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, which to me is an A-tier trilogy. It's arguably an S-tier trilogy. You've got the first Guardians, many would say, is one of the best MCU films. Guardians 2 is the divisive one. That's what probably holds it back from truly being S-tier at the end of the day. But to me, that's still like a 4.5 out of 5 movie. I've had a rocky road relationship with it over the years. I've kind of gone back and forth on how I feel, but I'm at a place right now where I'm willing to say, yeah, that movie's a really good sequel. And then the third film's a beautiful send-off to these characters. It pulls on the heartstrings, you'll cry, you'll laugh, it's got a banging soundtrack. The first and third are really, really good, like top 10 MCU movies, and Guardians 2 is like 10, 11, 12 in the MCU for me right now. So A-tier trilogy, consistently very, very good, just not God tier like something like The Dark Knight. Then we got the Deadpool trilogy, which I adore. The first film to me is maybe one of my most rewatched comic book films. Deadpool 2 is kind of the outlier here, where I think it's a very good movie, like a 4 out of 5, but I don't go back to it as much. You got Cable, Domino, the X-Force in there for a minute, but the movie as a whole, not as good as 1 or 3. Deadpool and Wolverine, maybe my favorite movie of the year. It's electric. We got the return of Hugh Jackman in the role. Sure, you've got these cameos, more so supporting roles that were kept hidden, but it's got an awesome soundtrack. Insanely cool action, and just moments as a fan where I sat back and went, wow, we're really witnessing this right now, aren't we? It's one of those MCU event films. On top of that, the movie has tons of heart. It's hilarious. So I'm going to say the Deadpool trilogy is going to go A tier, and I'm going to say a hair behind the Guardians trilogy, just because Guardians 1 and 3 are so good. and I think I'd take Guardians 2 over Deadpool 2. That's kind of like the battle here, because Guardians 1 and 3 versus Deadpool 1 and Deadpool and Wolverine, I'm like, okay, those cancel each other out. But Deadpool 2 versus Guardians 2, I think I take Guardians 2 by a hair. So that's why as a whole trilogy, I'm going to put Guardians over it. Also, I do think as, you know, a 3-film story, Guardians maybe functions better than Deadpool, because Deadpool and Wolverine was years later. It, you know, was in the MCU, whereas the other 2 films weren't. So I'd give it, you know, the edge to Guardians, but both are A-tier trilogies. You could argue S-tier, and I wouldn't even be mad about it. Next, we got the Raimi trilogy, which to me rules. I grew up watching these films. I had the ability to see them all in theaters this year for the first time. It feels like an eternity ago, but that was only in like April and May when I was able to watch these in theaters. And the first 2 Spider-Man movies, all-time stuff. Spider-Man 3, I'm here for the memes. And you know what? I could do something crazy right now, and I think I'm going to. Despite the fact that Spider-Man 3 is clearly the weak link, and Spider-Man 3, it might not even be as good as some of the films from the Guardians trilogy or the Deadpool trilogy, I'm still going to put this at the S tier, and I almost just did something crazy, and I still might. I kind of want to. I don't know if I have the guts to do it, but I'm going S tier with the Raimi trilogy right behind the Dark Knight. It wouldn't be right to put it over the Dark Knight trilogy. Do I rewatch it more? Yes, but the Dark Knight trilogy is so phenomenal. They're just a bit darker of films, so it's not as easy to go back to them. The Raimi trilogy, I watch every single year no matter what. You know, the first Spider-Man film, to me, I've said, probably my favorite Spider-Man movie. You got Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, iconic. I quote the hell out of this movie. You follow that up with Spider-Man 2, and you've got Doc Ock, played by Melina, highly quotable again. And I love how every Spider-Man movie, even the third, which has way too many villains and too much going on, and it's frankly way too cheesy for its own good. I love how all these movies still are able to tell this human story where they really put an emphasis on Peter Parker's journey, how he goes through hell, he goes through the ringer, but at the end of the day, he puts on that mask and is Spider-Man. He puts everyone else above himself, making him a great Spider-Man. I love this trilogy so much. You could kind of flip a coin between the Raimi trilogy and the Dark Knight trilogy for my outright favorite comic book trilogy, but I think the Dark Knight's going to edge it out, even though I've rewatched the Raimi trilogy more. You know what? Screw it. I'm putting the Raimi trilogy over. This is my personal preference. I haven't revisited the Dark Knight trilogy as recently. I know Spider-Man 3 is the weak link. Trust me, I know. But I adore those films so much that I'm going to do it, and I'm going to own it. Next, we got the Captain America trilogy, consisting of the first Avenger, Winter Soldier, and Civil War. And this might be a hot take, but I'm going B tier with it. I think it's a very good trilogy, but Civil War is more like an Avengers movie to me than anything else, and I think First Avenger is a bit overrated. So First Avenger, fine origin. Winter Soldier, bordering on the top 10 in my personal MCU ranking. A lot of people will say, what? How is that not in your top 10? It's just personal preference. Civil War is the best of the trilogy, but it does feel like Avengers 2.5. And it introduces Spider-Man and Black Panther. It's essentially an Avengers movie in my mind. So as a body of work, it doesn't really feel like a trilogy, to be honest, which is why I'm going B tier. I also think the first Avengers weaker than the other two by a significant margin. It's still a very good 3-film run from Captain America. Moving on, we've got the Wolverine trilogy, consisting of X-Men Origins Wolverine, The Wolverine, and Logan. Kind of an oddball one, but I kind of wanted to get it on here because I needed a couple more to talk about, all right? I'm going to be honest with you. I would say this is a C tier trilogy for me because Logan is phenomenal. Like, it's an S tier movie, right? The Wolverine is like a C or B tier movie, and then Origins is F tier. So I'm just going to say, you know what? I'm going to put this in the middle. I never go back to the Wolverine. I never go back to Origins. And Logan is an all-timer comic book film, so it kind of just lands in the middle of this list right now. Next, we got the MCU Spider-Man trilogy, which to me is better than the Captain America trilogy. Homecoming is a very fresh origin story for Spider-Man because it doesn't go the conventional route. It's not even really an origin story. Technically, we get that abridged version in Civil War. Homecoming's a fun coming-of-age flick, pays homage to a lot of the 80s films that I love and that are set in high school, and you've got Vulture as a menace here. Keaton crushes it, and he's one of my favorite MCU villains. Then you go into Far From Home. That's the weak link of this trilogy. Gyllenhaal has a lot of fun as Mysterio, but it's undoubtedly the least rewatchable of the trilogy. And then you have No Way Home, which is like a top 5 MCU movie. It's a cheat code having that in your trilogy. It's more multiversal. It's the biggest in scale and story, by far the most complex of the 3 films. It goes for it, but it gives us all 3 Spider-Man in live action swinging without feeling forced. You know, Tobey and Andrew come in, and their versions of Peter really help Tom Holland's version of Peter get out of a dark place that they themselves have already endured. I'm a big fan of this trilogy, and I will say it's better than the Captain America trilogy, but again, Far From Home, weak. It's by far the weakest. It holds it back. Homecoming, very good. No Way Home, the clear standout. I'm going B tier above the Captain America trilogy. You could argue A tier for this. Next, we have the X-Men trilogy, the first one from the early 2000s. I never go back to this. I just don't. I was supposed to rewatch them all before Deadpool and Wolverine. Personally, a lot of things came up. I had a move I made, and a lot of things just piled on top of each other, so I didn't go back to all the X-Men films. That's still, on the table for me to do eventually, but I would say, frankly, D tier. I don't ever think about these movies. The first one doesn't age well, doesn't hold up. The second one I know people say is fantastic. I haven't watched that movie in over a decade. And then the third one I remember being and a lot of people dismiss it as the worst X-Men film, so I'm going D tier. If the new era of X-Men with McAvoy and Fassbender had a trilogy consisting of just First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse, I'd argue B tier for that because of how much I love First Class and Days of Future Past. But we did get a fourth film, so it disqualified it from being a trilogy. And rounding out this list, we've got the Iron Man trilogy. Iron Man, Tony Stark, my favorite character in the MCU, but the unique thing about him is he maybe has one of the worst trilogies in the MCU. The first film I will defend to the end of the line. It is a top 3 damn near MCU movie for me. I adore it. I've seen it a million times in my life. The second movie, I've got a big soft spot for, tons of nostalgia. Yes, it's heavily flawed. Yes, it tries to set up way too much and is just overstuffed, frankly. But I can still go back and enjoy it. Iron Man 3, to me, has always been the one I revisit the least. I was never crazy about it. The twist with the Mandarin, still to this day, kind of, I'm sour on, frankly. But as a trilogy, it's all right. I'll go top of C tier with it. Over, the Wolverine, I think Iron Man alone, the first movie, carries a lot of weight to me. But 2 and 3, I rarely revisit. I've got nostalgia for 2. 3, I rarely ever want to think about. So all in all, it's like an average trilogy at best. It's crazy to say that about my favorite character in the MCU, but his best work as an actor, as a character, is outside of his own 3 films, so rest in peace, Tony Stark. But yeah, this is my tier list ranking of comic book movie trilogies, and I know I probably, enraged a lot of you by going Raimi over The Dark Knight, but I want to make this point very clear if you're still watching. This is based on my personal preference. This is not some objective list. This is my personal taste, because if I wasn't infusing my videos and rankings with that, there'd be no point in watching. I got the Raimi trilogy above The Dark Knight there. You kind of flip a coin, like I said. I just revisit the Raimi trilogy a lot more and have more fond memories of it growing up. But again, that's my ranking of comic book movie trilogies. Let me know yours in the comments down below and hit that like button. Where does the Venom trilogy place? Have you even seen the new film, which I almost just called Let There Be Carnage for a millionth time? Let me know your thoughts on The Last Dance down below and check out my review linked up above. But that does it. I appreciate you guys for watching as always, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.